Good morning, traders. Today is Tuesday, June 7th. My name is Charles, and this is the Pirate Traders live stream. Please smash that thumbs up if you don't mind to start us off this morning. Okay, well, what are we looking at here? We've had a lot of balance this week in the market. What you're looking at up here on the chart is what we call a balance area. The market often trades its way from one end of balance to the other. And so what we are looking at for the overnight last night is just a continuation of that balance, right? It's what I called for at the end of the day yesterday to members of the brigade, that the highest probability being that we didn't get up to test the upper end of balance yesterday was that we would head down in the overnight to test the lower end of balance. So that is exactly what we have done. In doing so, we are opening with a gap down this morning. And so the first order of business will be the market trying to fill that gap. It is a pretty large gap, so it is worth noting that gaps that are that large are sometimes hard for the market to repair right away. But that will be the first order of business, repairing the gap, filling the gap to yesterday's low. If that does not happen, and the market starts to trade back down here towards these overnight lows, things get very bearish below the lows from the first and the second. That's sort of the bottom end of balance. So we can dip down there and then pull back up. But if we push below these lows, come back up and find resistance, that would be bearish for continuation lower. And the counter auction to the upside to fill the gap, which is the first order of business, would also mean looking below the balance area and heading back up towards the opposite end. So it shouldn't be that difficult for the market to fill the gap. So if we can fill the gap, that would be the first step towards continuation to the upside. But if we can't and we start to head lower, it could get very bearish very quickly in a gap and go type of scenario. So let's see what the market has for us. Also, it's worth noting on the NQ here, you are also below the balance area. And same thing as before. If you push below that overnight low and you start to get resistance down there, that is very bearish because there is also an old gap that was left behind at the end of last month between 12.344 and about 12.380. So if the market starts to trade down into that gap, we would look for that to fill. But of course, the first order of business is the gap up to yesterday's low at around 12.531. But just reminding you that both markets are in a place where they could get very bearish very quick here. If the buyers don't step in. All right, NQ below overnight low, that is bearish. So we're now looking for resistance around 12.437. All right, ES going for the gap fill. Can they do it? So just to review once more for those of you that are just joining, we're at a very pivotal area down here where we opened at the balance area low. The first order of business for the market is to try to fill the gap, getting to yesterday's low. If they can, that is bullish, if they fill the gap. And then if they get continuation up into yesterday's range, that is bullish to head all the way up to the opposite end of balance, up at 41.87. But if we don't fill the gap, we get a gap and go to the downside. We push below the overnight low, come back up and find resistance. That is bearish for continuation to the downside. So the market should show its hand very soon here. Right now they are still filling that gap. Scooball says balance, rules, or gap and go. What is going to be stronger today? We'll just have to wait and see. Right now, it seems like the gap is the first priority. I would say probably balance rules are a little bit more potent than gap and goes. It's tough to say. Ranjan says, if the market turns bearish, what would be a good place for an entry? Taking out the low of 40.76 on the ES. Yeah, although a gap and go, you could get in before that. So if the market gets back to the zero line on the ticks and it can't get any higher, and then it starts to head back down without fully filling the gap. So if it leaves space between here and here, and it starts to head lower once again, pretty much anywhere in here you could go short because of the gap and go, the momentum from that. And so then when you push below that low that you mentioned, the overnight low, you could look for resistance as a way to monitor for continuation. So if it pushes down and then it gets down to here, and it comes back up, and it's getting resistance there, well, you stay in the short, and you see how much further you can take it. But if it seems like they're going to push back through and come back up, you go ahead and take profits there. So that's what I mean when I say the first order of business is, can they fill this gap? The assumption is they can, so we assume the market's going to go up. But if they can't, if they fail to fill the gap, it is a gap and go, which is bearish immediately, as soon as we recognize they fail to fill it. We also just dipped back into the balance area on the NQ and got resistance there. So they're still trying to fill that gap as well. But it's a little bit bearish to see that we're getting that resistance. Once again, both markets getting resistance without filling the gap. It's a little bit bearish. They're still trying to fill the gaps, but it's feeling bearish. Lee, can you talk about what you're looking at when you're on the market internals page? Well, like literally right now, the main thing I'm looking at is this right here, the tick. And I'm just focused on, can it get back to the zero line, right? That would give, because the overnight inventory was net short, if the market can get back to the zero line, we know anyone who was short in the overnight and was looking to take profits on their short will have had the chance. And so that'll give us a great indication of whether there's going to be new buyers or sellers that want to pile on once we get to that zero line. Obviously, if it gets above, that's new buyers. If it pushes back down again, that's new sellers. And so if we get that in combination with having not yet filled the gap, that would be bearish. If we do get the ticks above zero, we have a pretty good chance we'll go fill that gap, which would be bullish. Terrible taper at the high here. So we do need at least one more push, I would think. All right, so the NQ, just shy of filling their gap by just like a point. All right, well, we fixed that taper on the high. And now we're getting resistance once again without filling the gap on the ES. All right, looks like they have the buyers for the gap fill. You can do it. So remember, when they fill the gap, when they get to yesterday's low, if they immediately get resistance there and start to head lower, that is still bearish as a gap and go. It's only if they start to push back up into yesterday's range, we get very bullish. Very quick. All right, NQ looking bullish. Back in balance, back inside yesterday's range. Still got one more tick to fill the gap on the ES. Uh, 7 Mile, would this be just a little squeeze as we get past yesterday's lows and running stops? As we get past yesterday's lows. So the way I would think about the gap fill is a combination of sellers from the overnight taking profits, right? And buyers stepping into the market wanting to fill the gap, wanting to get that gap fill, which they know, is very common. Both of those people run out, right? Sellers taking profits from the overnight, they run out. So by the time you get to yesterday's low, they're gone. And the new buyers who are buying to target the gap fill, they run out right at yesterday's low. So until you get to yesterday's low, you don't really know if it's new buyers or sellers trying to push the market somewhere new. You have to get to there. And then if there's more buying, if they continue up into yesterday's range, then you know that's new buyers and it's bullish. If not, a gap and go sets you up for a bearish scenario. Jeremy says, wow, NQ hit a wall. Didn't hit a wall, hit a giant node of volume that presented as resistance. But it is bullish that they're back up in the value area, making this a look below and fail. So let's wait and see how the ES reacts when it finally fills that gap. But the NQ is good for continuation to the upside at the moment. All right, so we got this node of volume just above the halfback here. This should act as support to try to head back up. We didn't quite fill the gap. So there should still be some buyers who want to try to fill that gap. If this halfback breaks, I will get bearish, though, as a gap and go. So if we break below 40.92, I'll get bearish. Because they should not have had that hard of a time filling that gap. They came literally 2 ticks away. There's halfback for NQ. Well, like I said, NQ's in a different position than the ES because they filled their gap and got new buyers. So they're not quite as bearish. So halfback for the NQ is at like 12,500. But I would say really to get me bearish on the NQ now, they'd have to get back through the open. 12,456. Screwball, Pirate Traders, technically we filled the gap. Like with single prints, there is no gap, only weak reference. There is still a gap. This little arrow right here, Window Trader puts that up when there's still a space. So there is still a gap there. For show. And we could also consider that A-period high weak. Rocket says Yellen talking at 10. Now's as good a time as any to take a look at the daily. Just give ourselves a reminder that we are in this little balance area right here. So just looking at the daily right now, I would think if we can get a trade to the opposite end of balance, that could be the big enough breakout to get us out of this larger downtrend here. But of course, first we got to fill the gap. This is so interesting that it's having such a hard time filling that gap. All right, well, we got a poor high here in the B period, increasing the odds. The market's going to push away and then come back and repair it, filling that gap. Chirp says, if the gap fills, does that repair the poor low from yesterday? No, the poor low from yesterday was repaired when we opened below it today. So if you open, there was like 3-week references down here, and then a poor low from yesterday. But because we opened below them, all of them were automatically repaired. Only the weak references above remain. Interesting. Well, like I said, if we pass through the halfback now, 40.92, I get bearish. Because this is a gap and go. And of all the gaps I've ever seen, one that should have had no problem filling is one that was at the very beginning of a rotation back up to the opposite end of balance. So it is a little bit peculiar that we couldn't even fill that gap. Layman says, why upside smells fish? Why upside smells fish? I don't know, man. Because they're upriver? I have no idea. I suppose you could say the fact that we're having such a hard time filling the gap is fishy. So that's fair. John Q, am I going crazy or do I hear birds? I don't hear any birds. No idea what you're talking about. Scooball, what about a rotational market at the balance area low? Yeah, that's possible. I don't know why we would do that, though. Rockingham, leaving the poor high, perhaps adding to the bearishness, indicating trapped longs. Kind of. Yeah. Again, the fact that it was so hard to fill the gap is really what makes that bearish. More so the fact that it was poor. All right, well, I'm bearish. We got a counter auction to the upside based on the overnight activity. Couldn't even fill the gap. Ticks got slapped down both attempts to get above the zero line. Both the other internals are below the zero line. And the breadth, at least, is trending lower. So this all looks bearish to me. The only bullish signal is the fact that we're still in balance. But if we push below that overnight low, come back up and find resistance there, I will be looking for much further downside continuation. So now we're watching, does previous support become resistance? Does this node that we're in right now at 4096 become resistance? Overlord, Charles, from your experience, does it always have to be that exact for a gap fill? We missed it by one tick. Could this, at least context-wise, count as a gap fill? I would say no. I would say it does have to do it exactly. Because of the way liquidity works, there would have been orders. There would have been people who went long who literally put their take profits right at that exact level. And so those people are still long right now. So I would say, yeah, to truly actually get a gap fill, you have to tag the low from the previous day. Man, we got ourselves a nail biter here with the ticks, just grinding on that zero line. Which way do you want to go? All right, well, getting those ticks back above the zero line, I'm back to neutral. So once again, looking for a gap fill and seeing do we have sellers when we get there to yesterday's low. Jason, Charles, when we are near the high or low of a balance area like today, is it possible for a tight rotational day in this area? Yeah, it is. We've had those before. Sometimes you get a tight rotational day right on a balance area, high or low, where it just like grinds back and forth all day, right on top of it. Just like that. So it's certainly not impossible. But to my mind, I think, like I said, the market's trying to do one of two things. It's either trying to get back up to the opposite end of balance, in which case it is having a shockingly difficult time doing that, or it's going to break lower and then look for further downside continuation. So let's see. I think we might have some sellers waiting at yesterday's low. If not, if I'm wrong and we start to trade up into yesterday's range, it gets very bullish very quick to head on up. Luca, I haven't been trading for a long time. I see that the gap fill is a good edge. What would you say, how often a play like this doesn't work? We can look up the stats. So gap ups fill 57% of the time and gaps down 41. So it's a 50-50 guess. All right. Oh, geez. Looked away for a second. All right. Well, pushing back up into yesterday's range is bullish. So now we are looking for support and continuation to the upside as a balance area play. Boy, that happened quick. I literally looked away for like a second. So now as long as they find some support when they pull back down again, they get some buyers, the target becomes the opposite end of balance. The market just got bullish. We got some, not necessarily majorly low volume, but we got some kind of low volume nodes here right around yesterday's low. So I would think those need to backfill. Looking for support right there at that A period high. Anita, when you said Short, we still had a weak top. How do you look at that? Oh, well, I didn't say short. I said bearish. There's a difference. First, I have to get bearish, then sell resistance. I don't sell right at the moment that I get bearish. But with the weak reference, yeah, I mean, you're right. That's one data point to take into consideration, right? That it had a weak high that needed to fill. Another data point was it had a gap that needed to fill. But it was just, to me, the fact that they tried and tried and tried to fill and they couldn't. If, they broke, the level I gave was half back at the time. If they broke below half back, I'm going to get bearish. So that's just what my analysis told me, was that if they were going to go repair that weak high, they had their chance over and over and over again, and they didn't. So they were probably going to head lower. And I was just wrong. It happens. All right, so we got another poor high here in the C period. Should give us the momentum to head down and backfill these single prints we left behind from the B period, and we will look for support at the base of those single prints. So looking for support at 4107.50. With that, I shall bid you all farewell. If you're a member of the brigade, head on over to the private stream. I will not be here tomorrow. I'm moving to a new apartment, so I will be gone all day tomorrow, but back Thursday. I look forward to seeing you all then. Have a great rest of your day.